Elira stood at the edge of her family's grand estate, staring out into the vast expanse of shimmering silver grasslands that stretched as far as the eye could see. Her homeworld, Vailith Prime, was a planet of stark beauty, its skies painted in hues of lavender and gold, its landscapes dotted with crystalline structures that reflected light like prisms. But today, none of it brought her joy. Her heart felt heavy, weighed down by an ache she couldn't quite name. She had always known her place in the world, or so she thought. As a member of the Vailith, one of the most advanced races in the galaxy, Elira had been raised to value logic above all else. Emotions were seen as weaknesses, distractions from progress and survival. Yet now, standing here alone, she couldn't shake the gnawing sense of unease that had settled deep within her chest. Behind her, the sound of footsteps broke through the silence. Turning, she saw her father approaching, his tall frame draped in flowing robes of indigo. His sharp features were set in their usual stoic expression, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation, that made her pause. "Elira," he said, his voice steady yet distant. "We must speak." She nodded, following him inside the towering crystal palace that served as their home. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, every surface gleaming with precision. They entered a private chamber, where holographic projections of trade routes and resource maps hovered silently in midair. It was here that her father stopped, turning to face her. "There is no easy way to say this," he began, his tone clipped. "Our resources are dwindling faster than anticipated. If we do not act soon, our people will face hardship unlike anything we have ever known." Elira frowned, confusion clouding her thoughts. "What does this have to do with me?" Her father hesitated again, his gaze dropping for just a moment before meeting hers once more. "You are intelligent, capable, and valuable. We have arranged for you to be sold into servitude aboard a human colony ship. Your skills will fetch a high price, enough to secure our future for generations." The words hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, she simply stared at him, unable to process what he had just said. Sold into servitude by her own family. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You can't mean this. I'm your daughter." His expression didn't soften. "This is not about emotion, Elira. It is about survival. You know as well as I do that sacrifices must sometimes be made for the greater good." Tears welled up in her eyes, though she fought to keep them at bay. How could they do this to her? How could they treat her like nothing more than a commodity? But even as anger surged within her, she knew protesting would be futile. Her father's mind was made up. There would be no changing it. Days passed in a blur. Before she knew it, Elira found herself aboard a transport vessel bound for the outer reaches of the galaxy. Shackles encircled her wrists, binding her to dozens of others who shared her fate. Some cried softly, while others sat in stunned silence. None dared to speak aloud, lest they draw the ire of the guards patrolling the cramped hold. Despite her despair, Elira refused to let herself break. She clenched her fists tightly, focusing on the hum of the ship's engines rather than the pain in her heart. She would survive this, not because she wanted to, but because giving up would mean letting them win. As the journey wore on, snippets of conversation reached her ears. The humans, she learned, were a curious species, short-lived compared to the Vailith, yet driven by an unyielding spirit. They had built colonies across countless worlds, often relying on enslaved beings to maintain their operations. Those who resisted were punished severely, their bodies broken until they submitted. The thought sent a shiver down Elira's spine. She had heard stories of human cruelty, tales meant to instill fear in those foolish enough to cross paths with them. But there were also whispers of kindness, of individuals who defied the system to help those in need. Could such beings truly exist, or were these merely myths designed to offer false hope? When the ship finally arrived at its destination, Elira stepped onto alien soil for the first time. The colony sprawled before her, a chaotic mix of metal structures and sprawling fields. Smoke billowed from chimneys, and the air carried the acrid scent of industry. Guards barked orders, herding the new arrivals toward processing centers where they would be assigned tasks. It was during this chaotic shuffle that she first noticed him, a human male standing apart from the other. He was shorter than most of his kind, with unruly dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Unlike the other overseers, he didn't carry himself with arrogance or disdain. Instead, there was a quiet intensity about him, as if he were observing the scene with both curiosity and discomfort. Their eyes met briefly, and for a fleeting moment, Elira felt something stir within her. A spark of defiance, perhaps, or maybe just the tiniest shred of hope. Whatever it was, it gave her strength as she moved forward, determined to endure whatever lay ahead. Little did she know, this human, whose name was Kal, would soon become the catalyst for everything that followed. But for now, all she could do was focus on surviving each day, one step at a time. The days blurred together into a monotonous cycle of grueling labor, exhaustion, and fleeting moments of rest. Elira quickly learned that survival in the human colony depended on two things: endurance and silence. The overseers were relentless, their voices sharp and commanding as they drove the enslaved beings to work harder and faster. Mistakes were met with swift punishment, lashings, withheld rations, or worse. Elira adapted quickly, her Violet intellect allowing her to master tasks far more efficiently than most of her fellow workers. She kept her head down, focusing on precision rather than speed, ensuring she completed each assignment flawlessly. Her efficiency drew attention, not just from the overseers, but also from Kale, the quiet human who had caught her eye upon arrival. Kale wasn't like the others. While his colleagues barked orders and wielded their authority with cold indifference, he moved among the workers with an air of restraint. He rarely raised his voice, instead observing silently, his piercing blue eyes scanning the chaos around him. Over time, Elira noticed small gestures that set him apart. A nod of acknowledgement when someone finished a task, a subtle pause to check if anyone needed water during breaks. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly on the fields, Elira worked alongside a group harvesting crops under the watchful gaze of an overseer. Her hands moved swiftly, plucking ripe stalks with practiced ease. Despite her focus, fatigue began creeping in, her muscles screaming in protest. Just as she felt herself faltering, a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Kale standing nearby, holding out a canteen of water. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the intent behind the gesture. "Drink," he said simply, his voice low enough to avoid drawing attention. For a moment, Elira hesitated. Accepting help from a human felt wrong, almost like admitting defeat, yet thirst burned in her throat, and pride alone wouldn't quench it. Finally, she reached for the canteen, taking a cautious sip before handing it back. Their fingers brushed briefly, and though the contact lasted only a second, it sent a jolt through her, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than despair. "Thank you," she murmured, her tone clipped but sincere. Kale gave a slight nod before moving on, leaving her to wonder why he bothered. Was this some trick, a way to lull her into complacency? Or was he truly different from the rest? As weeks turned into months, these small acts of kindness became a pattern. Kale would find ways to make life marginally easier for Elira and the others, fixing broken tools, shielding them from harsh punishments, even smuggling scraps of food when rations ran low. Each act was subtle, calculated to avoid suspicion, but their cumulative effect was undeniable. At first, Elira remained wary. Trust did not come easily to her, especially after what her own family had done. But over time, she began to notice details about Kale that intrigued her. Unlike the other humans, he seemed uncomfortable with the hierarchy of oppression that governed the colony. There was a tension in his posture, a heaviness in his gaze that suggested he carried burdens of his own. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of work, Elira found herself sitting alone near the edge of the field. The sky above was painted in fiery hues of orange and red, a stark contrast to the grim reality below. She stared at the horizon, lost in thought, until a familiar voice interrupted her solitude. "You're not like the others," Cale said, approaching cautiously. His hands were shoved into the pockets of his worn jacket, and his tone was tentative, as if unsure how she would react. Elira turned to face him, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "You think differently. You adapt faster. Most people here, they give up. But you fight, even if it's just in small ways." Her defenses rose instantly. "And why should I trust you? You're part of the system that keeps us here." Cale didn't flinch at her accusation. Instead, he met her gaze steadily. "I'm not proud of it. But I don't have much choice either. Not yet, anyway." His honesty surprised her. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that Cale might be telling the truth, that he too was trapped in circumstances beyond his control. Still, she wasn't ready to let her guard down completely. "So what do you want from me?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. "Nothing," he replied softly. "I just wanted you to know that you're not alone. Whatever happens, I'll try to help however I can." The sincerity in his words struck a chord deep within her. Though she didn't respond aloud, a tiny crack formed in the wall she had built around herself. Perhaps, she thought, not all humans were monsters after all. Over the following weeks, their interactions grew more frequent, though always discreet. Cale continued to look out for Elira, while she slowly began to reciprocate in small ways. When he stumbled upon a problem with machinery, she offered solutions based on her knowledge of advanced engineering. In return, he shared fragments of human culture, stories, songs, and ideas that painted a picture of a species driven by both flaws and virtues. Through these exchanges, Elira discovered a side of humanity she hadn't expected. She saw glimpses of resilience, creativity, and compassion, qualities that reminded her of the stories her mother used to tell her as a child. It was strange, almost disorienting, to reconcile these images with the harsh reality of the colony. And yet they gave her hope, however fragile it might be. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, Cale approached her again. This time, his demeanor was more urgent. "Listen," he whispered, pulling her aside. "There's something I need to show you." Curiosity outweighed caution, and she followed him to a secluded corner of the compound. There, hidden beneath a pile of discarded crates, was a collection of books and recordings. They were old, their covers worn and pages yellowed, but they contained treasures unlike anything Elira had ever seen. "These are stories from Earth," Cale explained, his voice filled with reverence. "They're about people who stood up against injustice, who fought for freedom even when the odds were against them." Elira picked up one of the books, running her fingers over its cover. The title was unfamiliar, but the weight of it in her hands felt significant. As she flipped through the pages, she realized these weren't just tales. They were blueprints for rebellion, examples of courage and unity that transcended species. "They're inspiring," she admitted quietly, looking up at Cale. "But inspiration alone won't save us." "No," he agreed, "but it's a start. And maybe we can build something from it." In that moment, Elira felt a spark ignite within her, a flicker of determination that had been buried beneath layers of pain and resignation. For the first time since arriving at the colony, she dared to dream of a future where chains could be broken, not just for herself, but for everyone. Little did she know, this newfound resolve would soon lead her down a path neither she nor Cale could have anticipated. The nights in the colony were long and suffocating, the oppressive heat lingering even after the sun dipped below the horizon. Elira lay awake on her thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling above her. Sleep rarely came easily these days, not because of physical exhaustion, but because her mind refused to quiet. The books Cale had shown her played on a loop in her thoughts, their words sparking ideas she couldn't ignore. She thought about the characters in those stories, ordinary people who rose up against impossible odds, driven by nothing more than a desire for freedom. They weren't so different from her fellow workers, were they? Each of them carried scars, both visible and invisible, etched into their bodies and souls by years of oppression. What if someone could ignite that same fire within them? But how? And at what cost? The next morning, as the workers trudged out to the fields under the watchful eyes of overseers, Alyra found herself scanning the faces around her. Most kept their heads bowed, avoiding eye contact with anyone, including each other. Fear had silenced them, isolating them in their suffering. Yet beneath the surface, she sensed something else, a flicker of defiance waiting to be fanned into flame. Cale noticed her unusual behavior during their midday break. He approached cautiously, sitting beside her as he often did. "You seem distracted," he said, his voice low enough to avoid drawing attention. "I've been thinking," Alyra replied, keeping her tone neutral, "about those stories you showed me." His brow furrowed slightly. "What about them?" "They're not just stories," she said, turning to meet his gaze. "They're lessons, examples of what can happen when people come together, when they stop seeing themselves as powerless and start believing they can change things." Cal's expression softened, though concern lingered in his eyes. "It's dangerous to talk like that here. If anyone overhears—" "I know it's dangerous," she interrupted, her voice firm despite its quietness. "But isn't staying silent even more dangerous? We work ourselves to the bone every day while they grow richer off our backs. How much longer are we supposed to endure this?" For a moment, Cale didn't respond. Instead, he looked away, his jaw tightening as if wrestling with some internal conflict. Finally, he sighed. "You're right. Staying silent won't fix anything. But rebellion isn't easy. It takes planning, resources, and trust, things we don't exactly have in abundance." Alyra nodded slowly. She hadn't expected an easy answer, but hearing Cale acknowledge the truth gave her courage. "Then let's start small," she suggested. "We build trust first. Teach them that resistance is possible, even in small ways." Over the next few weeks, Alyra began putting her plan into motion. Using her superior intellect, she devised subtle methods of sabotage, ways to slow down production without making it obvious who was responsible. She taught these techniques to a handful of trusted individuals, choosing carefully those who seemed most open to change. At first, the acts were minor, deliberately misaligning machinery, accidentally spilling supplies, or delaying tasks just enough to frustrate the overseers. Cale supported her efforts from the sidelines, using his position to cover for any slip-ups. He also helped spread hope among the workers, sharing more stories of human resilience and emphasizing the power of unity. Together, they planted seeds of rebellion, nurturing them quietly until they began to take root. One evening, after another successful day of covert disruption, Alyra gathered a small group of workers in a hidden corner of the compound. Among them were beings from various species, humans, Valeth, and others, all united by their shared suffering. For the first time, they spoke openly about their frustrations, their fears, and their dreams for a better future. "We've allowed them to divide us," Alyra said, her voice steady yet impassioned. "They tell us we're worthless, that we deserve this. But look around you. Look at the strength we have when we stand together. We don't have to accept this life. We can fight back." Her words resonated deeply, igniting a spark of determination in the group. One by one, they pledged their support, vowing to contribute however they could. Though the numbers were still small, Alyra felt a surge of hope. This was only the beginning. As the movement grew, so did the risks. The overseers began noticing patterns in the disruptions, their suspicions mounting. Punishments became harsher, designed to instill fear and discourage dissent. But instead of breaking the workers' spirits, the increased brutality only fueled their resolve. During one particularly brutal crackdown, Cal intervened to protect a young worker who had been singled out for punishment. The act drew unwanted attention to him, forcing him to reveal more of his involvement than he had intended. That night, as they met in secret, Alara confronted him about it. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her tone sharp with worry. "Now they'll suspect you." Cal shrugged, though there was no mistaking the tension in his shoulders. "I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Besides, I'm already in too deep. If they find out, they find out." His casual dismissal infuriated her. "This isn't just about you. If they discover what we're doing, they'll crush all of us before we can even try to escape." "I know," he replied, his voice softening. "But I made a promise to you, to everyone, that I'd help however I could. I'm not backing out now." Alara stared at him, torn between anger and admiration. In that moment, she realized how much Cal had sacrificed for their cause, risking everything to stand by her side. It was a reminder that true allies were rare and precious. The turning point came unexpectedly. Late one night, as Alara reviewed plans for a larger-scale sabotage operation, Cal burst into their meeting space, his face pale with urgency. "We need to move faster," he said breathlessly. "They've found evidence linking us to the disruptions. If we don't act soon, they'll arrest everyone." Panic rippled through the group, but Alara quickly took charge. "Listen to me," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We've prepared for this. We knew the risks. Now it's time to put everything into action. Trust me, we can do this." With renewed determination, the group finalized their plans. Using Cal's knowledge of the colony's layout, they identified weak points in the security system and mapped out escape routes. Alara coordinated the effort, ensuring every detail was accounted for. By dawn, they were ready. When the signal was given, chaos erupted across the compound. Machinery malfunctioned, alarms blared, and confusion reigned as the overseers scrambled to regain control. Amid the mayhem, Alara led her group through hidden tunnels Cal had discovered months earlier, guiding them toward freedom. The journey was perilous, fraught with close calls and moments of sheer terror. But Alara's leadership kept them moving forward, her unwavering resolve inspiring those around her. And through it all, Cal remained by her side, proving time and again that his loyalty was unshakable. By the time they reached the edge of the colony, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the horizon. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, swallowed by distance and terrain. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also the promise of a new beginning. As Alara glanced back at the group, her heart swelled with pride. Together, they had taken the first step toward reclaiming their lives. But deep down, she knew the hardest battles were still to come. The air was thick with tension as Alara and her group of escaped workers navigated the rugged terrain beyond the colony's perimeter. Behind them, the distant shouts of pursuing overseers echoed faintly, a grim reminder that their freedom was far from secure. Every step they took felt like a gamble, each breath stolen from the jaws of danger. Alara led the way, her sharp Valith instincts guiding her through the dense underbrush and rocky outcrops. Her mind raced, calculating every possible outcome. She knew the overseers wouldn't give up easily. Escapees were a threat to the colony's stability, and capturing them would send a chilling message to anyone else who dared defy the system. Failure wasn't an option, not for her, not for Cal, and certainly not for the dozens of beings counting on her leadership. Cal stayed close, his presence a constant source of reassurance. Though physically weaker than some of the others, he compensated with resourcefulness and determination. He carried a small device, a piece of salvaged tech he had modified to detect motion sensors and patrol patterns. It was his invention that had allowed them to slip past the outer defenses undetected. "Are we clear?" Alara whispered, pausing at the edge of a narrow ravine. The drop below was steep, jagged rocks glinting menacingly in the dim light. Cal checked the device, his brow furrowed in concentration. "For now," he replied, "but we need to keep moving. They'll figure out our routes soon enough." Without hesitation, Alira began descending into the ravine, carefully choosing footholds to avoid slipping. One by one, the others followed, their movements cautious but steady. Despite their exhaustion, there was a shared sense of purpose driving them forward, a fragile yet unyielding hope that they might finally taste true freedom. Hours passed, the landscape shifting from jagged cliffs to dense forests shrouded in mist. The group moved in near silence, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath their feet. Occasionally, someone stumbled or gasped in pain, only to be helped up by another member of the group. Bonds forged in adversity grew stronger with each passing moment. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Alira called for a brief rest. They gathered beneath the shelter of towering trees, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. Some collapsed onto the ground, too weary to speak, while others huddled together, sharing what little food and water they had managed to bring. Kale approached Alira, handing her a canteen. "We're making good time," he said, though his voice betrayed his fatigue. "But we're not safe yet. Once they realize we've left the forest, they'll send drones." Alira nodded, taking a sip of water before passing it back to him. "Then we'll have to stay ahead of them. Do you think your maps are accurate?" "They should be," he replied, pulling out a folded sheet of paper marked with scribbled notes and landmarks. "If we stick to this path, we'll reach the valley by nightfall. From there, we can lose them completely." She studied the map briefly, committing its details to memory. Trusting Cal's expertise, she turned to address the group. "Listen up," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "We've come farther than any of us thought possible, but we're not done yet. Keep pushing, stay together, and trust each other. We'll make it." Her words sparked a renewed sense of determination among the group. Even those who had seemed ready to give up moments earlier found strength in her resolve. Alira nodded, taking a sip of water before passing it back to him. "Then we'll have to stay ahead of them. Do you think your maps are accurate?" "They should be," he replied, pulling out a folded sheet of paper marked with scribbled notes and landmarks. "If we stick to this path, we'll reach the valley by nightfall. From there, we can lose them completely." She studied the map briefly, committing its details to memory. Trusting Cal's expertise, she turned to address the group. "Listen up," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "We've come farther than any of us thought possible, but we're not done yet. Keep pushing, stay together, and trust each other. We'll make it." Her words sparked a renewed sense of determination among the group. Even those who had seemed ready to give up moments earlier found strength in her resolve. The journey resumed, the forest gradually giving way to rolling hills dotted with boulders and streams. By midday, the sound of pursuit had faded, replaced by the eerie stillness of nature. Yet Alira remained vigilant, scanning the skies for signs of surveillance drones. She knew better than to let her guard down. It was during one such scan that disaster struck. As they crossed a shallow stream, a sharp crack echoed through the air, a twig snapping underfoot. Before anyone could react, a shadow darted across the sky, accompanied by the whirring hum of mechanical rotors. "Drones!" Cale shouted, pointing skyward. "Take cover." Panic erupted as the group scattered, diving behind rocks and trees. Alira cursed under her breath, realizing they had underestimated their pursuers' resources. Drones meant reinforcements weren't far behind. "We can't outrun them here," she said, turning to Cale. "We need to disable them." He nodded, already rummaging through his pack. "I brought something for this," he muttered, pulling out a small handheld device rigged with wires and circuits. "It's a jammer. If I can get close enough, I can disrupt their systems." Alira grabbed his arm, her eyes locking onto his. "You'll never make it alone." "I don't have a choice," he replied, his tone resolute. "Stay hidden. I'll draw them away." Before she could protest, he darted toward an open clearing, waving his arms to attract the drone's attention. The machines pivoted in unison, their cameras locking onto him as they descended. Heart pounding, Alira watched helplessly as Cale activated the jammer. sending bursts of static into the air. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the drones faltered, their rotors sputtering before crashing to the ground. Cheers erupted from the group, but Alira didn't join them. Instead, she sprinted toward Kale, finding him doubled over, clutching his side. "You idiot," she scolded, helping him to his feet. What if it hadn't worked? It did. He shot back with a weak grin. "And besides, I'm not letting anything happen to you." Despite the gravity of the situation, Alira couldn't suppress a flicker of warmth at his words. Shaking her head, she helped him rejoin the group, ensuring he stayed close as they pressed onward. By nightfall, they'd reached the valley Cal had promised. Nestled between towering mountains, it was a secluded haven, untouched by civilization. Streams meandered through lush grasslands, and the air carried the sweet scent of wildflowers. For the first time in what felt like forever, the group allowed themselves to relax, collapsing onto the soft ground with sighs of relief. As the stars emerged overhead, casting a silvery glow across the landscape, Alira stood apart from the others, gazing out at the expanse before her. She felt a strange mix of emotions: exhilaration, gratitude, and an underlying sadness for all they had endured. Freedom was within reach, but the scars of their journey would linger forever. Kale joined her, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch fashioned from a fallen branch. "We made it," he said softly, his voice tinged with awe. "For now," Alira replied, her gaze unwavering. "But this isn't the end. Not until everyone is free." He smiled, understanding the weight of her words. Together, they stood side by side, two beings bound by a shared vision of a better future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The valley was unlike anything Alira had ever seen, a hidden gem tucked away from the chaos of the galaxy. Its beauty was almost surreal, with crystal-clear streams winding through fields of vibrant flowers and towering trees that seemed to touch the heavens. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and life. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alira allowed herself to breathe deeply, her shoulders relaxing as if shedding an invisible weight. But it wasn't just the scenery that made this place special. It was its inhabitants. As dawn broke over the mountains, a group of beings emerged from the tree line, their appearance as diverse as the stars themselves. Humans, Valeth, and other alien species moved among one another with ease, their interactions marked by mutual respect rather than fear or hostility. They called themselves the Freeborn, a community of outcasts who had rejected the oppressive systems of both Earth and the Valeth Empire. Kale greeted them warmly, his face lighting up at the sight of familiar faces. "Their allies," he explained to Alira, sensing her initial hesitation. "This is where I've been getting supplies and information for months. They'll help us." Alira's golden eyes scanned the newcomers cautiously. Though she wanted to trust Cal's judgment, years of betrayal had taught her to be wary. Still, something about these beings felt different. There was no trace of cruelty in their expressions, only curiosity and kindness. One of them stepped forward, an older human woman with silver hair tied back in a loose braid. Her piercing green eyes softened as they landed on Alira. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm yet firm. "You're safe here." For a moment, Alira didn't respond. Safe. It was a word she hadn't dared to believe in for so long. Yet looking around at the harmonious scene before her, she found herself nodding slowly. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Over the next few days, the Freeborn welcomed Alira and her group with open arms. They provided food, shelter, and medical care, tending to wounds both physical and emotional. For many of the escapees, it was their first experience of genuine compassion in years. Laughter began to echo through the valley once more, a sound so foreign yet profoundly healing. Alira spent much of her time observing the Freeborn, fascinated by their way of life. Unlike the rigid hierarchy she had grown up with, this community operated on principles of equality and cooperation. Decisions were made collectively, with every voice given equal weight regardless of species or background. Even disagreements were resolved peacefully, through dialogue rather than force. Kale noticed her fascination and grinned. Not what you expected, huh? She shook her head, her expression thoughtful. No, it's not. My people always claimed humans were primitive, driven by greed and violence. But this, she gestured toward the bustling settlement. This proves otherwise. That's because we are all capable of change, Kale replied. It's just a matter of choosing to see beyond our differences. His words stayed with her long after their conversation ended, planting seeds of reflection deep within her mind. For the first time, she began to question the beliefs she had been raised with, the notion that logic alone defined progress, that emotions were weaknesses to be suppressed. Perhaps there was value in connection, in empathy, in understanding. As the days turned into weeks, Alira became more involved in the daily life of the sanctuary. Her intelligence and leadership skills quickly earned her a place among the Freeborn's decision-makers, and she found herself contributing ideas for improving the community's defenses and resource management. But despite her growing role, guilt continued to gnaw at her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she sat alone by the edge of a stream, staring at her reflection in the water. Kale joined her quietly, sitting cross-legged beside her. "You've been quiet lately," he observed, his tone gentle. "I can't stop thinking about my people," she admitted after a pause. "About those still trapped in the colonies, or worse, sold into servitude like I was. How can I enjoy this freedom while they suffer?" Kale nodded, his gaze fixed on the rippling water. "I understand how you feel. When I first came here, I couldn't forgive myself for staying silent while others endured injustice. But running away doesn't solve the problem. You know that better than anyone." She turned to look at him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, meeting her eyes, "that maybe your journey isn't over. Maybe finding this sanctuary wasn't the end goal. It was just the beginning. You have a chance to go back, to fight for those who can't fight for themselves." The idea sent a shiver down her spine. Returning to confront her former masters was unthinkable, yet the thought of abandoning her people felt equally unbearable. Could she really face them again? And if she did, what could she possibly hope to achieve? Determined to find answers, Alira immersed herself in the stories of the Freeborn. Many of them had come from backgrounds similar to hers, enslaved, oppressed, betrayed, and each had chosen to rise above their circumstances. Their tales of resilience inspired her, reigniting the spark of defiance that had fueled her rebellion. One night, during a gathering around a roaring fire, the silver-haired woman, whose name was Mara, spoke of the power of truth. "Oppressors thrive on lies," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "They tell us we're weak, that resistance is futile. But when we expose their falsehoods, when we show the world who they truly are, their control begins to crumble." Her words resonated deeply with Alira. She realized that her family's betrayal, though devastating, had also revealed a fundamental truth about the Velith society. They valued profit over lives, logic over morality. If she could bring that truth to light, perhaps she could inspire change from within. When she finally voiced her plan to Kale, he listened intently, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when she finished. "Going back won't be easy. They'll see you as a threat." "I don't care," she replied, her voice filled with quiet determination. "If I stay here, I'll always wonder if I could have done more. Besides," she hesitated, then added softly, "I'm not afraid anymore." Kale smiled, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "Then I'm with you. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." With renewed purpose, Alira began preparing for the journey ahead. Together with Kale and a small group of volunteers from the Freeborn, she devised a strategy to infiltrate Velith Prime, not with violence, but with diplomacy and evidence. They gathered recordings, documents, and testimonies from survivors, building a case that exposed the corruption and greed driving the Velith Empire. On the eve of their departure, the entire community gathered to bid them farewell. As Elira stood before the crowd, she felt a surge of gratitude for the people who had become her family. "Thank you," she said, her voice strong and clear, "for showing me that freedom isn't just about escaping chains. It's about forging connections and fighting for a better future." The cheers that followed echoed through the valley, lifting her spirits and strengthening her resolve. Tomorrow, she would return to the place that had once broken her. But this time, she wouldn't be alone. The days that followed Elira's confrontation with the council were a whirlwind of chaos and change. News of her testimony spread like wildfire across Valeth Prime, igniting debates in every corner of society. For the first time in generations, the Valeth people began questioning the foundations of their empire, the rigid hierarchies, the exploitation of others, and the cold pragmatism that had long defined them. It was as if a dam had burst, releasing emotions and ideas that had been suppressed for centuries. Elira became the face of this movement, not because she sought fame or recognition, but because her story resonated deeply with so many. She traveled across the planet, speaking to crowds both large and small, sharing her experiences, and urging her people to embrace empathy alongside logic. Her words carried weight, not just because of her eloquence, but because of the authenticity behind them. She wasn't asking for perfection, she was asking for progress. Cale stayed by her side throughout it all, his unwavering support giving her strength when doubt crept in. Together, they addressed gatherings of workers, scholars, and even former overseers who had begun to see the error of their ways. Each speech brought new allies into the fold, widening the circle of those committed to reform. One evening, after a particularly emotional rally in a crowded plaza, Elira found herself standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The crystalline towers shimmered under the light of 3 moons, their beauty softened by the hum of distant voices still echoing below. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration, her mind replaying snippets of conversations from the day. "You've come a long way," Cale said, joining her quietly. His tone was gentle, filled with admiration. She smiled faintly, leaning against the railing. "Have I? Sometimes it feels like we're barely scratching the surface." "That's how change works," he replied. "It starts small, almost invisible, but over time, those tiny shifts add up to something bigger than anyone expected." Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sky met the edge of the world. "Do you think we'll ever see real equality, or is this just wishful thinking?" "It's not just thinking," Cale said firmly. "Look at what's already happening. People are waking up, questioning things they never dared to before. That's progress. And you're the reason they're doing it." Elira shook her head, brushing off the compliment. "I'm not the reason. I'm just one person. This movement belongs to everyone. And that's exactly why it'll succeed," Cale countered, his voice warm. "Because it's not about one person. It's about all of us working together." His words lingered in her mind, offering comfort amidst the uncertainty. For so long, she carried the burden of survival on her own shoulders. Now, she realized, she didn't have to anymore. Change was a collective effort, and she was proud to be part of it. Back at the council chamber, tensions continued to simmer. Some members clung stubbornly to the old ways, dismissing calls for reform as naive idealism. Others, however, began advocating for gradual changes, abolishing the practice of selling beings into servitude, redistributing resources more equitably, and fostering dialogue between species. Though progress was slow, the fractures within the elite signaled a turning point. Elira returned to the council regularly, using her position as a former member of the ruling class to push for accountability. Her father, once unyielding in his beliefs, seemed increasingly conflicted. During one heated session, he finally broke his silence, addressing her directly. "Was it worth it?" he asked, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Destroying everything we built?" "I didn't destroy anything," Elira replied, her tone calm but resolute. "I exposed the truth, If our society collapses, it's because it was built on lies. But if we rebuild it, if we choose to grow instead of clinging to the past, we might create something stronger." Her words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. For the first time, her father looked at her not as a traitor, but as someone willing to fight for a better future, even at great personal cost. Months passed, and the reforms began taking shape. Slavery was officially abolished, though enforcing the ban proved challenging in colonies far removed from Bailiff Prime. Resources were reallocated to improve living conditions for lower-class citizens, and educational programs promoted cross-species understanding. While resistance remained, especially among the older generations, younger Bailiff embraced the changes with enthusiasm. Elira and Kale became symbols of unity, their bond transcending species and circumstances. Their relationship evolved naturally, no longer overshadowed by fear or mistrust. They spent evenings discussing dreams for the future, visions of a galaxy where cooperation replaced oppression and hope outweighed despair. One such evening, as they sat beneath the stars outside the sanctuary they had once called home, Elira turned to Kale with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met?" He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Honestly, I don't want to think about it. You changed my life, Elira. You gave me purpose. And you gave me courage," she replied, reaching out to take his hand. "Without you, I wouldn't have made it this far." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as meteors streaked across the night sky. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the universe, Elira felt a profound sense of peace. The scars of her past would always remain, but they no longer defined her. Instead, she chose to focus on the legacy she was helping to build, a legacy of resilience, compassion, and unity. Years later, when historians wrote about the fall of the old Bailiff Empire and the rise of a new era, Elira's name appeared prominently. She was remembered not as a victim, but as a leader who dared to challenge injustice and inspire change. Statues were erected in her honor, songs sung in her memory, and stories told to remind future generations of the power of courage and connection. But for Elira, the greatest reward came not in monuments or accolades, but in the everyday moments of joy and harmony she witnessed. Families reunited, friendships forged across species, and communities thriving together, all reminders that freedom wasn't just about breaking chains, it was about building bridges. As she stood one final time before a gathering of diverse beings united in peace, Elira reflected on her journey. From betrayal to redemption, from despair to hope, she had fought for something greater than herself. And as she clasped Cal's hand tightly, she knew she had found not only love but also purpose. The road ahead would always hold challenges, but she faced them with confidence. After all, she had already proven that even the hardest chains could be broken, and that true freedom began in the heart.